In this video, we're going to learn how to loop over data and how we can generate many UI components from an array of data. So to get started, let's open up the started link in CodeSandbox. I already have that open in this tab. So let me move this over to the other screen so we can focus on the CodeSandbox screen here. So let's start by looking at what we have, the data that we have here. So a very common task that we normally do in React or any other libraries or front-end frameworks is to receive some data from probably a server, some data living on a server somewhere. So the layout usually looks something similar to this one, where you have an array, and inside of the array you have multiple objects, and each object is going to represent for different resources or different objects. You can represent different things inside of these objects here. So on this one, we're representing a user. So each of these objects is going to represent a single user. For each object, you're going to have an ID, a name, company, a CEO, which is a Boolean, and then a image URL. So you can see then later you have another one with the ID, the name, company, SEO, and image URL. On this example, we have 5 different users. We're going to refer to these as users, even though these are famous people here like Bill Gates and Tim Cook, but we're just going to call them users. So we're going to build a list of users, and we're going to do this into 2 different components to see how we can organize our UI and how we can generate multiple UIs from this array here. So we're going to use this data to generate different UI components. So each one of these values from the ID is a string. This is a string. The name is a string. Company is a string. A CEO is a Boolean. And these are just random true or false. They're not really accurate. I don't know if they are CEO of the company, but currently I'm not sure. This is just random true or false. So we can also show you how we can work with Booleans inside of the data. And yeah, so let's start by in the components folder. There's no files in there. Let's create 2 files. We're going to create a users list.js, which is going to be a component which is going to render the list of users, right? And we're also going to create a user item that we're going to put together after, which is going to ultimately just contain the data for each single user. Let's start with the users list. And inside of the users list, let's create our functional component. So function users list. And we're going to return something here. Make sure we export default users list component, and let's test this out. Let's put a div here, and let's just put a h1, and let's say users list, and close the div here. Save that, and let's bring in the users list inside of the app component. Inside of the app component, we're going to import users list, and let me CodeSandbox importer for me at the top. So let's render that right after the HR users list component, right? And we can see the h1 here. So now we have a users list component. In the users list component, let's import the data. Let's import data from data forward slash data forward slash data. So now we have this array of users imported inside of the users list. So let's just console log it just to check it out. Data, check the console. We have 5 objects inside of the console log in here. Cool. Put that down. Come on. All right, so we got the data. Let's comment that out. So what we're gonna do here, we're going to loop over this array of data, and we're going to generate different UI components. So in order to do that, let's first let's do it in here right after the console log. We're going to use the map method from arrays, right? We have an array, we can use any methods from an array. We're going to start with the map, and later I'll show you how you can change different methods, so to use multiple ones. So first, let's start by doing const users list. This is going to be a new array that is going to return from the data.map method. So in the map method, we're going to have access to each user. So let's call this variable user. And in here, we're going to just do an arrow function, which is, we're going to use the user object. So we can generate a h1 first with the user dot name inside of the h1. Right, so everything we're doing here, we're grabbing the data. We're using the map method. We're grabbing each user object that is inside of the array, and we're returning an h1 with the user name inside of the h1. If we console log the users list, let's just rename that to users list. Save, and we check the console. We can see that now what we have is an h1 element with each of the name displayed in there. In the users list, this is an array with 5 objects, and we're going to have a h1, and now we're going to be able to display this list inside of the JSX statement here after the return keyword. So to display this new array of h1s, we're going to go right under where it says users list, and we can actually get rid of this now and just return. Let's just change the div to a section. There's going to be a section of the page, and we're going to just return the users list here. And we can see that we have all the h1s with the username, Tim Cook, Bill Gates, Mark, Jeff, Elon, and they are being rendered from this users list array that we created by mapping over the data, grabbing each user, and returning an h1 with the name inside of it. Cool. So this is a very common task. You get an array of data, you need to map over it, you need to render some type of UI. Right now we're just displaying the name, but we're going to display all that information that is inside of each of the objects here in a second. Now what we're going to do is that I'm going to show you that you can also, let's comment this out. We're going to create another one. So you can have that there. And we're going to say again, const users list. But first we're going to grab the data. And what I want to do is that I want to first use the filter method. So we can grab each user, and we're going to filter by user.isCEO if it's equals to true. I want those to be returned only if they're true, if they're CEO. So if this is set to true here, this is true, this is true, and this one is true. So we should see Tim, Mark, and Elon at the end, right? So we can use the first to filter the data. So we're only going to get those objects. Then we can also use, I can do the dot here because we're gonna do multiple ones. So that filter, we also want to, let's see if we do the sorts. We can also sort them out. We're gonna grab A and B. So this is just normal array methods that we're using. And we're going to grab we're gonna look at the name, so we can do it alphabetically. So A.name, if it's, let's do it by ascending. So B.name, if it's true, if this is true, we're going to return 1, else we're gonna return -1. Cool. So that should work. And then we can also do finally the map. So the map, we need to, let's do map. Let's just return the same thing, user, and then we're gonna do user. Let's do an H1 here, H1, and inside of the H1, user.name. H1, and let's save that. Oops. Let's get rid of this semicolon at the end. And here we go. So we have first filter out. We're going to filter the ones we only, by here we're saying we only want the objects where CEO is set to true, which we said it was Elon, Mark, and Tim. We can confirm that by doing Tim, Mark, and Elon. And then we said we want to sort them alphabetically, so from the lower to the higher. If it's greater than, we're going to return first. This is going to be last. This is just how we can sort them in alphabetical order. Also, and then finally, after we filter them out and sort them, we're going to return the H1 with the name for each one of those users that we have. Right, so you can use multiple ones to return an array, and then here we still have the console log, and here we're just returning the users list here. So here we just use one, but you can change multiple ones and return a nice organized list of users or whatever type of data you're working on. Let's get rid of this console log because we don't need that. We can see it in here. So for now, we've seen how we can just map over the array and then in the JSX pass the new array with the information with the new data here. But we can also do the mapping inside of the JSX. Right, for example, we can get rid of the users list here. Right, I'm gonna comment this out so you don't get confused with this. Right, we're gonna ignore everything there. But now inside of the JSX, and actually we don't need all that space, we can just stay like this. We can grab just the data here, right, inside the curly brackets, data.map. We can grab again each user, and we can return a H1 with the user.name, and this is going to accomplish the same thing we did before. And when I save, it's going to format it and it's going to look like this. And right now we have all the names, right? We're displaying an H1 with each one of the names. We're not filtering or sorting anything right now, but this is to show you that you can do your mapping outside of the return keyword, right? Before the return, and then you just render the array, or you can, inside of the JSX, use your curly brackets to map over the data inside of the JSX. This is really a kind of like a preference thing, if you prefer to do it before or you prefer to do it inside of the JSX. Most of the times I like to use it inside of the JSX if it's not too if it doesn't look too ugly. But basically that depends on your preference, or maybe the company that you work for, they have a best practices guideline where they will give you some feedback on where you should be doing that. But most developers, they like to do it inside of the JSX, but you can do it before or inside. This is fine. It will accomplish the same. Sometimes this is more readable, but this is more kind of like expressive, and you can just map inside of the JSX. So the last thing we're going to do is that let's just, instead of just rendering the username, we want to display all the information about the user. So right now we're using the name. Let's look at the data one more time. We have the name, we have the company, this is CEO, which is a Boolean, and then we have an image URL with a picture of each one of these users. So in here, let's just display the image on top, and also I have some basic styling that we're going to use for the layout, just basic styling. And we're going to use it inside of the users list for now, and then later as the last thing we're going to work on the user item. But let's display all the data here first. So at the top of so let's organize the data. Let's create a div here, which is going to wrap, I want to wrap the image. Let's wrap everything first. So div here to wrap everything, so we can apply the styling. And for this div, we're going to use the class name that we have. We're going to use so look at the styles. We're going to use the user item just to display flex and create a flex item there. So let's do user underscore item, and inside this div you see how it's being applied at the moment. User item is the class name for this div. Inside here we're going to display a image tag, and for the image tag we're going to set the source to user that what's the name of this here, image URL, that image URL. Right, we can see the image, we can see the name there. Let's do a alt tag here, which React is going to warn us about. User.name, let's just put it there for now. All right, so let's see what else we need to do here. So for the image, we have a class name of user underscore img, which is going to resize the image, add some border to the image. You can see it here, image URL or img. And then after doing that, we're going to have so let's see, right after the image, let's put a little space here. So right after the image, we're going to keep the image to the left side, and we're going to display all the other info inside of another div. So let's create a div here, div, and let's close the div here, which is where we're going to display all the user information. We're going to keep the name there. In this div, we're going to apply the class name user underscore details. It is adding some padding to the left, and maybe what else we have here? User details is just a margin. And let's go back to the users list. And then inside of this div, right, this one here is for the user details. We're gonna put the name. We want to show in an H4. Let's show the user that company. Also, let's use some curly brackets here because I want to display a different message. If they are CEO, we want to display this person is the current CEO. If it's false, we want to display a different message. So we can use curly brackets here, and we're going to check user.isCEO. If this is true, we want to display a, let's do an H6 so it looks smaller. And inside of the H6, we're going to display a message, else we're going to display a different message here. This is running so slow. H6 here. So the first message here, we're going to say user that name. So the name of the user is CEO. And then else, we're going to say user that name is not the CEO, and save. All right, so now we have this conditional expression here, which is going to check if the current user that we're mapping over, if the CEO is true, we're going to display this message. If it's false, we're going to display the second message here. So now we have the name of the user, the company, and a small message here. Tim Cook is CEO. Bill Gates is not the CEO, etc. with the other users. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 users. Looks like we need a little bit more CSS, but that's okay for now. But yeah, this looks good. Let me see if we have any other data here inside of the array. CEO, company, and image URL. No, that's good. Let's save that. So right now, the last thing we need to do that I want to show you here is how, because right now we have the map and we just have all the JSX here. We can have all this JSX extracted to a separate component, which is going to clear up more this useless list component here. Because right now we could say, okay, if we're not doing anything else, we can leave this here. But most of the times you probably have more coding here. So let's just extract all of this here to the user item. So for the user item, let's copy this div here. So the one that is wrapping everything, the user item, all the way here. So let's Control X or cut this out. And we're going to bring it to the user item. In the user item component, we're going to create a new function, user item. And in here, we're going to return parentheses and paste the code there. Right now we get these red lines because it doesn't know what user is. It says user is not defined. So we're going to receive the user information via props. Remember, props is data that is coming from one component to another. So we're going to receive the user via props. So we can declare that in here. And don't forget to export the full user item at the bottom. And there we go. We got no red lines, no warnings or anything here. So now we have this user item, which is going to just return some JSX. It's going to receive some user object and it's going to display all the data there. Now we can go back to users list. We're going to import user item. And then in here, the only thing we need to do here is that we're going to display the user item component in here. So we don't need this parenthesis here. We can just say user item component. User item, yes, component. And then we need to make sure we pass the props to the user item. So here it says cannot assign a read-only message. That's okay, we can ignore that for now. I think that's a code sandbox error. So let's do a user prop, and let's pass the user item in here, and let's save. And let's see, we got an error here. Let's see what's going on. Data.map user, we displaying the user item, and looks like my code sandbox is running a little bit slow. Let me double check in the console here. And it says data.map user item. Let's see, we have a section. Let me delete some of this space just to see if there's a little error in here, or it's just my code sandbox that is a little bit slow. All right, so I think everything looks good. Right, user item, save. Let me give it a quick refresh. Make sure you save and then refresh it. Let's look at the console. Unexpected token, users list, unexpected token on line 15. What could it be? Section data.map. We're grabbing each user, we're returning a user item, we pass in the user, we're creating a user prop, passing the user, and that's it. Everything looks good. Let me double check on the user item. User item is fine. Users list is fine. Format, save. Let me see if I can format this document. Everything looks fine. Everything looks good to me. Okay. Nope. Everything looks fine. Not sure what's going on. It's probably a code sandbox error. Great. I wish it would get fixed without me destroying everything here. Let's delete some of the stuff. Let's redo it again just to check it out. Save. Let's see, what are you going to complain about? All right, inside here, we're going to grab this data.map for each user. I want to return a user item, and I want a user, and I want to pass a user through props, so user in here, and now it's working. Now it's working. All right, maybe I was missing a extra paragraph somewhere there. An extra parentheses there. All right, cool. Nice debugging. A live debugging here. So the only thing I do want to point out here is that inside the user item, every time we have a list of components, right? Now we're rendering a different list of components or elements. React is going to give you a warning somewhere about this warning here. Each child in a list should have a unique key prop. And this is going to always be a warning that you can solve by just setting a key prop, which is defined in React. You can just say key and pass in the user .id. And the user .id is just the ID that has each object contains here. So ID1, ID2, ID3. And this is going to be your best bet to always assign a key prop and pass in the user.id. If there's no ID, sometimes we like to use the index. We could grab the index from the map and pass it here. But if you have an ID, you should always use the ID, because index are going to slow down your application. It's going to affect the performance of your application because IDs can change. So let's put it back to ID. I mean, index can change, not the IDs. The IDs are always the same. They don't change. But your index, if you remove one of these items in your application later, that ID is going to change, right? If you remove an item from the array, and that is going to cause a performance issue on your application. So always use an ID if you have one. Index is the last thing we recommend using. But if you just need to get rid of it, if it's just a simple application, if we just want to get rid of it, you can use the index as well. All right, so now we know how to get some data, right? Right now we have some dummy data from a data.js file. Later we're going to learn how we can fetch data from a server over the internet. We're going to receive the data and we're going to loop over the data or map over the data just like we did here. And you can use any of these options that we just went over, and you can display your data and you can have a nice UI, right? You can add more CSS to this, change the colors, and do more things to the page and have a really nice layout for your application. All right, that's it for looping over data. I will see you in the next video.